The Linotype machine had 90 keys in it, and I can still remember the layout of the keys. ETAOIN SHRDLU CMFWIP VBGKQJ and X and Z were up here. That was in the era of the old weekly newspaper, and they've sort of disappeared.
Santa Clarita residents in the last third of the 20th century would know the name Scott and Ruth Newhall and might think Scott and Ruth ran the Signal newspaper forever. But the truth is, they were up in San Francisco until 1963 when they bought the newspaper. Before that, it was owned and operated by an altogether different family that was equally dynastic. I'm Leon Warden, and this is Legacy, Santa Clarita's Living History, brought to you by the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society. Biggest name in town in the 50s anyway, and the 40s for that matter, was the name Trueblood. They ran the Signal just as long as Scott and Ruth Newhall later did, 25 years. And one of the biggest names in the Trueblood family was Richard Gus, with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Leon.
Now, your father was Fred Sr., correct?
Correct.
And he bought the Signal when?
He bought it in June of 1938 from Almond Thatcher, who had it since I don't know when. The sale price at the time was $4,000. There were two papers for sale at that time. The South Antelope Valley Press was for sale, but for $12,000. That moved Dad back from the bidding process. So he took the Newhall paper and ran it for 25 years.
I got a question for you. It used to be called anyway, and maybe still is technically, the Newhall Signal and Saugus Enterprise.
Yes.
What was the Saugus Enterprise?
Well, you almost backed me into a corner on that one, Leon. It was a paper that was at a brief time of operation, and I don't know where it was put together. Obviously, it must have been in Saugus. I don't know who ran it or when it was combined with the Newhall Signal. It emerged
sometime before your dad bought the paper.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you've been here since '38?
Yeah, I arrived here in the late summer 1938. I was 11 years old, and it was quite a different scene from central Indiana, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that in a second, but right now, right up front, I want to show folks a photo. And it's one that you shot in 1962 at Melody Ranch, one of our more famous historical photographs. It's the photograph of Melody Ranch burning down. Tell me about that day.
Well, I heard that, I think I got the word from the sheriff's office that the place was going up in smoke. And so I got out there and I thought in a flash, you know, the camera loaded, ready to do the work. And so the thing was all timbers and dry wood, and it went up in smoke in a big hurry.
Right.
But I got a picture of it. I might have gotten a couple of them, but the one that I liked was the one that you have here. And so you might look at that photo and wonder, well, who took the picture of you taking the picture? Well, that was the competition. That was the guy from the San Fernando Sun. But anyway, it was a sad event when that place went up in smoke.
You know, I got a question for you. I don't know if you would remember this, but I've heard stories that on that day in August of 1962, Elvis Presley was there doing a photo shoot for a magazine, and supposedly, you know, the fire broke out and he took buckets of water and threw them on the fire on this one building. You know anything about that?
No.
Did you see Elvis out there?
No.
Any Elvis sightings that day?
I mean, everybody ran for the hills when that place went up in smoke, you know? So I don't know where that story originated. I'd be curious to know.
Do you think it's not true?
I have no position to argue with you, really. I don't know. But it's interesting. I wouldn't know where to go to find out.
Yeah.
All of those people who might know have left this earth. So.
Right. And, you know, at the time, Melody Ranch was owned by Gene Autry, and he bought it in 1952 from Ernie Hickson. And I understand that you remember Ernie Hickson.
I knew him briefly, sort of, I was a kind of a tag-along guy. Mm-hmm. My brother, Fred, that's young Fred's father, was quite acquainted, well acquainted with Ernie. And they used to kick it around a lot out there. He'd go out and talk to Ernie. Ernie was a very interesting fellow. He had a lot of stories to tell. And so I wish I had more more light to throw on that for you, Leon, but I was busy doing other things. I was a good bit younger. And although I knew of Ernie Hickson, and you saw his in the photo, in the credits leading into a cowboy movie, there was Ernie Hickson, historian.
Right.
For, I don't know whether it was Monogram or Republic Studios. And
yeah, one bought the other. Where were you living at the time? Were you living in Placerita Canyon, or?
yeah, I was out there on Quigley Canyon, just off of Quigley Canyon there. And so that was, I didn't pay much attention to that movie. I'd go out there from time to time to watch him shoot Charlie Starrett was there. I think Hopalong may have done a couple of movies out there. And it took forever. So between Movie Town, as we called it, and the Harigi Ranch, which is a little bit farther
Up
Placerita Canyon, there were movies going on at both those places all the time. In fact, I ran into Gary Cooper out at the Harigi Ranch.
Yeah.
What a thrill that was. And they were doing a picture out there.
Were you still a teenager then?
I was young enough to be impressionable, I'll tell you.
You moved here in '38 when you were 11 years old.
Yeah.
How is it that you never moved away from Newhall?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I moved away when I enlisted in the Air Force in August of 1950.
Yeah.
I served my time, and I came back and associated with the Newhall Signal with my dad. And when the paper was sold in 1963, by the way, Scott Newhall did not buy the paper directly from the Truebloods. The paper was sold to Ray Brooks, who kept it a while.
A few months or something like that, I think.
And sold it to Scott.
Yeah.
Ray Brooks ran a paper called the Tahunga Record Ledger, and I think it was more of an investment for him. And so Scott came along, and he was a funny guy. I can't think of his name. I kind of crack up. He was the guy that called Ronald Reagan Constable Reagan, and he talked about the local highway patrol commander out there, which got the commander transferred to Fresno. He was quite a guy.
You know, I didn't really realize that it was 25 years that your dad and then your brother, after your dad died, ran the Signal.
It was not a very rewarding, monetarily it wasn't. It was a lot of work.
You bought it for $4,000, you sell it for $3,000?
Oh, I would have given an opportunity. It took a lot out of both of us. And I couldn't see the reward in it, but I kept at it.
What did you do there?
I did everything. I ran the Intertype machine. Now that's an old, what they call a hot typecasting machine. We had two of them, and I took a crack at them. I learned how to do that kind of work at the old Frank Wiggins Trade School in L.A. Now it's L.A. Trade Tech. So I could do that, and I could run the press, and I could sell advertising, and I could meet the public when I had to, and almost anything, you know. That was in the era of the old weekly newspaper, and they've sort of disappeared. And you heard me speak of hot metal, type metal. That's gone. Now, all that kind of stuff is in Mexico now. The only time you run into a machine that uses that kind of a process is at a store where they make rubber stamps. So that's the sum and substance of my.
I wouldn't begin to know how a linotype machine works. I mean,
they're incredibly complex. They're made up of thousands of parts. And a guy who can run one and fix one is worth his weight in gold. I think Scott had one put in out in there's one on display out at the Signal office building out there. Looks like it's in reasonably good shape.
Yeah, what did you have to do? Take every letter and stick it in a slot?
No,
tell me, describe for me how the thing works.
I'll try to compress it so it doesn't get too boring, but the Linotype machine, that's the originator, and the Intertype came after the patent ran out, and
Okay.
we were big Intertype. But anyway, you had a keyboard. It had 90 keys in it, and I can still remember the layout of the keys. ETAOIN SHRDLU CMFWIP VBGKQJ, and X and Z were up here. And that was duplicated on the opposite side of the keyboard in white keys for capital letters.
Okay.
In the center of the keyboard were the blue keys that had numerals, punctuation, ligatures, whatever. So you had to learn all of that and do it using the touch method, like a typist would do.
So you push the buttons and all the type moves into place?
Well, as you pressed, if you pressed a key and held it down, then the magazine, which was up above you here, contained matrices or tiny little molds, each with a letter that that you would assemble in a line. And you could watch it as you assemble it. You could see it, and then you would send it up, and the machine took over from there. And out came a line of type in a tray to your left.
Okay.
And then
then what'd you do with that?
well, that was what you printed, used in the paper. That was the type you used. And when you got done printing and your paper was out, then you take all that work, all that stuff you had done, those letters and the type, and melt them up and use them as fodder for the next week.
Okay.
The machine was ingenious in that an arm came down from up above like this and took the matrices, those are the little molds I told you about. There were several thousand of them in this magazine, and took them back up here, and they were distributed, and they all fell in the right groove in this magazine, which was grooved to accept these little matrices.
So that's how you get them in those grooves. Okay.
Yeah, and they would always fall in the right place. You had to have that correct. So learning that was a head stretcher, boy, I tell you.
Now the Signal was weekly throughout the entire time that you guys owned it, right?
Yeah, it was weekly. We strained from time to time to put out 16 pages. It was really, that was a hunk of work for a little.
Well, how many people worked there?
Well, let's see. I hate to count these on my fingers, but anyway, I'd say 8 to 10 on the payroll, something like that.
How many people lived in town at the time?
Well, all but maybe.
You know, I guess there's a difference between 1940 and 1960, but how many people lived in town in 1940?
Oh, I see, of the population?
Yeah.
Well, interesting enough, there was a population sign that state of California put in on the north side, just marking the city limits. It gave the population and the elevation above sea level. And the elevation, I believe, was 1,200 and, I don't know what the change was, 1,200 and some, population 1,400 plus.
Okay.
So that's what the little town, and it was the trading center of the entire valley, was what they call Old Town Newhall now.
Right.
It's where everybody came to buy groceries. We were sadly lacking in a lot of things in Newhall at that time. We had one medical doctor and one osteopath. That was it, and a little 7-bed hospital.
You had a Safeway and you had a Bank of America,
We
right?
had 2 Safeways.
2 Safeways. Where were they?
Well, the one where Trasieras is now,
Right.
and then on the opposite side of the street and down a ways was the second Safeway.
Okay.
I think they closed it up after a while. And they had other, gee whiz, what did we have? We had 3 or 4 other markets in town, small ones. People's Market, P&W. Oh, I don't know.
You'd been there quite a while before Newhall Hardware came along in 1947.
Yeah, I remember.
What was there before then?
God only knows. I believe that was, there was the mayor of Glendale at that time was a fellow named Joe Bodino, and his nephew was Don Guglielmino, if that name should be familiar to you.
Yep, founder of Newhall Hardware.
That's right. And I think when Don got out of the service, I believe that's how it went, Uncle Joe set him up in business. And he took it and ran with it, and very successful, extremely successful. He was a hard driver, but he ran one heck of a store. And I was awful sorry when they closed their doors. The store always made money, too. He had such a variety of things. He had bridles and saddles and cowbells, and he said there was a place where you could buy weapons, you know. In fact, I bought one there myself. And it was well run.
Yeah. You were 11 and 38, so you're a good age to join the military, go into World War II.
Korea.
Korea?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
you didn't make World War II. Didn't get in 45?
How old was I? I graduated from high school in San Fernando High in 1945. I was 17 in June. I didn't turn 18 until October.
Okay.
So, but I was just in time for the Korean War.
Just in time for Korea.
So I just decided I'll just enlist and get it over with. So that's what I did. And I'd been shipped, I went to Korea. I was shipped over there. It's a pretty awful place at that time. It looked like it was pretty much the way the Japanese had left it when they were run out of town. So,
how long were you over there?
I was over there. The tour of duty was a year.
Okay.
It was a rough place to serve. Japan was just the opposite. It was a marvelous place, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there in '51. So that was about it for my military experience. You know, you always meet people in there that were interesting, your whole lifetime buddies, and
for some reason you decided to come back to Newhall.
yeah, I came back to Newhall. Let's see, the boat left Yokohama and took the northern route, and I got back to Yerba Buena Island, which is smack dab in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. And that was it wasn't the end of my service. I had another year to serve. They put me in Travis Air Force Base, which is a busy, busy place. And so when I got out in September '53, I went back to the old newspaper.
Now, what kind of cameras did you use? How did you get into photography?
Well, I had to. I didn't know anything about cameras, but most of the big city camera guys, even the Monterey Herald, which I admired, that's a paper I read all the time when I lived in Carmel. But most of the cameras now in that period of time were 35 millimeter, using available light. Great way to shoot pictures. But there I was with this clumsy old speed graphic, you know, large format and all that. And
it's not 35 millimeter.
No, the negative's about, well, it's 3 inches by 4 inches.
Okay.
And if you had a 4 by 5, then you had a negative that size.
Why'd you use that?
Well, that
work better in the newspaper, or what?
Well, with a speed graphic, you usually scared your subject to death. You hold it up there. You try to humor them into to not look like people at a funeral. Where a guy with a 35 would hold it up like this, you know. He had a variety of lenses he could use. He'd be in and out of the thing, and you'd still be fooling with that graphic. So I did some picture work for the Carmel Pine Cone. They found out I could handle a graphic. They sent me
as a newspaper.
Yeah, that was a little weekly newspaper up there, still going. And so I did some photo work for them. Very interesting place to work too. A lot of nice people there.
So when was it you came back here then? Late 50s or?
I came back to Newhall, let's see, 65, 67. 1967 I returned to Newhall.
57.
67.
67?
I went to Carmel in '63, just after we sold the paper.
After selling the paper, okay. That's where you were.
And I
afterward.
took a month off, and then I heard about Carmel and a job opening. I drove up there just to see what was going on. He grabbed me right off the street and said, "You're what we're looking for, pal. Come to work." And I was there for almost 4 years. And the paper was sold. The Pine Cone was sold. The new owner and I knew wouldn't get along very well. So rather than fight that, I quit. I went over to the Monterey Herald.
Okay.
That was too big and too busy for me. A beautiful newspaper, well written, a great publisher, great editor, but I didn't like all everybody buzzing around. And so I came back to Newhall.
Tell me a little bit more about your Signal years. Now, the Melody Ranch burned down while you were there. That would have been along about the time that Walt Disney donated some buffalo to Hart Park.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, we got some advance notice that Walt would be in town and that he was getting ready to donate. I don't know how many head of buffalo there were, but there's quite a few. And so there was arranged that I think the county must have had something to do with it. But
yeah, because the county owns the park.
The county owned the park. So anyway, Mr. Disney showed up, and whatever the appropriate county person to receive the gift was there. And of course, you had the grip and grin type, photo
you shot
opportunity.
The grip and grins too. Yeah, not always something burning down, but the obligatory grip and grin.
Yeah, but there were the Hart acres, the William S. Hart acres, were big enough to support the number of buffalo that he donated in there. So it was a good opportunity to. He's quite a nice guy too. Yeah. You know, so I was kind of impressed with him. William S. Hart, just to digress for a sec, he was blind when he died. And he used to have my dad drive up the winding road to the castle up there, say, "Fred, come on up. I want you to go through my mail." He couldn't read. But he got a lot of mail that, sort of get rid of, separate the wheat from the chaff. That's what Dad did. He went up to help Bill, say, "Keep this one, Bill. This one goes out." Yeah. And he was quite well acquainted with Bill.
Now, Hart died in '46. I'd always heard that Hart didn't really, get out much around with the locals.
Well,
he kind of lived on his hill and kept to himself.
He did. Yeah, people would go up there. Tom Mix was a steady visitor up there at the Hart Ranch.
Yeah, I guess Tom Mix died in '40 or something like that.
Yeah, he died driving a Ford automobile. Yeah. They drove it into a dry wash and it flipped over and he broke his neck. He didn't have crash bars or roll bars.
So Tom Mix would come out there. Huh?
Yeah, oh yeah, he was a steady visitor out there. And Bill kept 3 or 4 or 5 beautiful Dalmatian dogs. And he had places of nice pads for them to sleep on. He fed them little goodies that they loved, He had a sister, I think, that lived up there, Mary Hart, and a niece, and Mary Ellen Hogewoning was her name. And she was a visitor there. My sister Joan, she's not here anymore, and Jolene Haregi, she's not here anymore, and Mary Ellen were all told to come to the Hart Ranch. Bill would take them down to Hollywood to buy shoes.
Oh, yeah.
So they all piled into Bill's gorgeous 1940 Buick Limited, the big black limo. And for the ride down there and the purchase and the ride back to Newhall. That was a big thing. Boy, that was a thriller for the girls. When we had the problem in Newhall, we had no cemetery here. Our water system was not all that adequate. And there were other things. No high school here. Yeah. I missed that because
46, right?
The first graduating class at Hart was in 1949. I missed it by 4 years.
So you went to San Fernando High School?
Yeah. Yeah.
How'd you get there? Drive? Ride a horse?
No, the dear people down at LA Unified School chartered 3 buses. One they stuck up in Castake for those kids up there. One was up Bouquet Canyon, up where the falls are. Right. It's where they left that one. The other one was up in Mint Canyon. Okay. And they gathered up students who were attending San Fernando High and busted them all down there. Yeah. So we were all glad when they decided to put a school in, Yeah. Our own grammar school, which still exists, it's at I think 11th and Walnut Street, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And as I came here in the month of, I believe it was October 38, in February 1939, that school burned to the ground.
Yeah, you would remember, and might even have been in on that burning down, were you?
No, I just slept right through it.
I always figured it was Tom Frew. But, you know.
No, it caught the auditorium, the whole thing went, because there was no water. And the fire engine came up there and pumped all the water out of his tank, and all they could do was just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So they had one school bus, and an old lady named Mattie Dill drove the school bus.
She was still around. Yeah, that's an old name in town.
Yeah. And we had good teachers, great teachers.
Yeah?
Oh, you bet. We had an old-fashioned principal, a guy named Lester Dalbey. Mm-hmm. They named a little stretch of road for him down there, Dalbey Drive.
Right.
And he was an old bald-headed Canadian. And you either learned your lessons or you stayed after school while he harassed you. But what a wonderful teacher. He's the guy I remember the most because he taught us the most. He didn't want to send any dummies down to San Fernando High, and he didn't.
And Newhall School went through grade 8, right?
Right.
Yeah, so you would graduate from 8th grade and then go to
That's right.
9th grade,
Yeah.
starting in San Fernando.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned not having a cemetery, and I know that Eternal Valley wasn't, I guess, put in until the late 50s, 57, 58, something like that. Where did you bury people then, before that?
Oh, they took him to the valley. There's a lot of burial grounds down there and cemeteries down there. But they had the old, I think there's a section of Eternal Valley that's laid out for early pioneers.
Yeah.
And they have the marble statuary or grave markers there for them.
Mm-hmm.
And early movers and shakers, that's where they ended up, in that area there.
Where's your dad buried?
Well, he's buried in the Garden of Devotion. That's the one in the middle, in the
At
center.
Eternal Valley.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a good thing. The people in Newhall, some people in Newhall were kind of jaundiced against the cemetery because they figured it would take too much water.
Mm.
So Mark Gates, who had that, saw it through to its completion, he was an undertaker from Santa Monica. He put his own water system in, drilled his own well, had all the water they wanted.
Yeah.
So that problem was solved right away. There were other things that we lacked, but little by little, these things were brought under control, and it made it much more livable here. We had one dentist in Newhall, and we had, as I say, one doctor.
Dr. Ross, I think?
Dr. William D. Ross.
Yeah.
We had the one dentist, and that was the guy that you went to when your teeth needed fixing. We had just a couple of lawyers, a guy named Stanley Weissel. He was there for quite a while. I think he passed on sometime before I went up to Carmel. And I think at one time Arthur Perkins, who was the plank owner of the Historical Society, or was as far as I was concerned, I think he was a judge.
He was, Justice of the Peace.
Yeah.
You didn't have to have any legal training back then in order to be a Justice of the Peace.
Well, I think he was such a dear fellow. He and I wouldn't get along if I didn't let him call me a moron or, retarded or something like that. We had these shouting matches in his office, and pretty soon here come the Newhalls knocking on the door. Like, what's going on in here? Well, this Perk and I'd laugh,
Yeah.
There's a lot to tell. The old Newhall Airport, where the planes would come in when it fogged in over the valley.
Which one are you talking about? You're talking about the one that's out like by Magic Mountain Parkway now?
It was on Newhall.
Towards the hospital on Newhall Avenue?
Yeah,
Going up,
that's when Newhall Avenue went straight through.
went through up to the Henry Mayo.
Yeah, and that's
Before
where
Henry Mayo. But.
the old DC-3s had come in and
Right.
disgorged the passenger. The bus would pick them up and take them to Burbank.
Now there was another one though, a landing strip out by Magic Mountain Parkway at one point, wasn't there?
I don't know. Never heard of it.
Do you know of any other landing strips besides the one that you're talking about?
Well, up in Hornby, they call it. They don't call it Hornby. The old timers call it
Yeah,
Hornby.
Ruther Avenue off of Soledad now. Up there.
Yeah, it was called a
Well, that was this. Yeah, that was the air park up like somewhere around White's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
6S Ranch Air Park,
Yeah.
operated by Helm Schmidt, Earl Schmidt, and Mabel Schmidt.
Right.
And it was just a strip that they could come in on. There was no none of the things that are attached to a regular strip. But
I mean, we have arguments about this, and I've often been trying to figure that out. You know, which in Newhall, the one that you're talking about on Newhall Avenue is the only one that you know about in Newhall.
That's the one that I went out and saw the planes, and
Right.
they had a beacon that went around and around and around, and they had a little building there. The guy was in there working on teletype and all that. So it worked.
You heard it here. Gus, I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Legacy, Santa Clarita's Living History. We'll catch you next time.